A science story, huh?
These NYU scientists,
I felt
right.
But I was so
And I just thought, well,
I had figured it out.
It was that golden moment.
Because science was on my side.
Hey everyone, welcome to The Story Collider, where true personal stories about science help us to discover how weird and wonderful it is to exist in this world and be a human. I'm your host, Misha Gajewski, and today's episode is all about self-care and setting boundaries. You know, the things your therapist constantly tells you to do and then you ignore them. Should we stop that? Probably, since setting boundaries and taking time for self-care seem to really work out for both of our storytellers. Our first story is from writer, podcast host, and producer and yoga teacher Yves Jeffcoat. Her story is a great reminder that self-care isn't just bubble baths and face masks. Setting boundaries and taking care of yourself is a radical act of self-love, and something we all need more of in our lives. I can't wait for you to hear this beautiful story. Here's Yves.
So one day I'm upside down in headstand, and I practice yoga at home all the time. I've done dozens of headstands, so this isn't anything that's abnormal. But there are two things that are abnormal, and that's one, that my partner and I have gotten into a fight and he's gone away for some undetermined period of time to get some breathing room. And that's that two, my vision in my left eye is abnormally blurry, but I'll come back to that one in a second. One, I'll start with the fight. And that happened after we watched a documentary at the Plaza Theater. And I don't need to go into the details of that. That's not important. But what you do need to know is that I blew up and I yelled a lot, enough to get semi-permanently furrowed eyebrows and a dull, persistent headache. And so he goes away and I'm at home alone. And I'm having to deal with this eye thing. So I'm noticing that the vision in my left eye is weird. And I'm like, what's going on? So I'll rub my eye and I'll blink my eye and I'll close one eye and then the other, and it's not going away. So I tell myself, I'm like, okay, I'll go to sleep and then I'll wake up. And if it's not better by the morning, then I'll know that something really serious is going on and I'll have to go get it checked out. And so I'll wake up in the morning and it's still the same. And so I'm in this headstand, and usually I use my vision to find my steadiness, to find my balance, to find my gaze when I'm in headstand. And I'm realizing it's not working. My eye is still off. So something's wrong. So my husband comes back and I'm holding back this information from him because we're not on good terms. But I'm like, okay, this is serious, so I have to tell him. And we do make peace. But that peace and reconciliation, it doesn't last long because I tell him about my eye and I'm worried and he's worried and he's worried that I'm worried. So we decide that I need to go get it checked out. So that's when I skip work and the flurry of doctor's visits and tests and all of this other stuff starts to happen. And first I go to an optometrist. The optometrist is pretty stumped by what's going on. So then after that, I go to a neuro-ophthalmologist, and the neuro-ophthalmologist is like, you have this thing called optic neuritis, and that's the thing that's happening with your eye, but that still doesn't solve my problem, so I go to the neurologist. And the neurologist is like, okay, you gotta go do some more tests, I'm gonna order them. And they're tests that I definitely I don't want to do. So I'm scared, and I don't know what's on the other side of this. It seems like nobody knows what's wrong, and that scares me even more. It feels like I'm this lab rat running through this maze that is the US medical system. But that doesn't matter because I have to continue on these tests. But in the process of doing these tests, I learned that MRIs and their abnormally, unusually loud beeping and buzzing is something that's really easy to get my anxiety up and my feelings of claustrophobia up. And I also learned in this process that getting stabbed in my spinal canal with a needle as part of my lumbar puncture is something that freaks me out, but it's something that I can get through. And I'm being poked and I'm being prodded, and the anticipation of being diagnosed by something devastating is exhausting. But I continue with these tests at the behest of my neurologist. And this is something that I haven't gone through before. I'm not used to this. I'm 23 and I haven't been in the medical system like this. I'm not used to these serious medical enigmas, and I'm not used to these prying hands and expensive machines and insurance approvals. But I have to go through it. And I end up going back to the neurologist. And at this point, I feel a little bit better because my doctor is a Black woman, so I'm a little at ease, and my partner's there with me, and that gives me a little bit of comfort too. But still, my stomach is churning and my hands are clammy, and I'm sitting there waiting on her to say something. And she pulls up my MRI, my doctor, and she shows me the lesions on my brain. And I don't understand this. I'm not a doctor. I can't read these things, but I see light gray blobs in a sea of darker gray. And she tells me that I have multiple sclerosis, also known as MS. And MS is, I have the relapsing remitting kind. That's like the first stage. And she tells me that it'll never go away. It's chronic. And basically what happens is I have flare-ups of symptoms that come and they go. But, there is the possibility that I will have this thing forever, and it will do things like give me loss of vision, loss of cognitive function, and loss of mobility. And my stomach drops. And things quickly go from emotional to clinical, though, because she hands me this packet of information and she tells me that I have to take medication, and she tells me about new normals. And I don't know how to handle this. I feel like I don't really know how to deal with new normals and what that means, but I have to. So I'm not able to cry then. But later at home, in the comfort of my partner's arms, I'm able to feel held enough to cry. But meanwhile, my eyesight is still getting worse. So I do go get an infusion of steroids to be able to help me deal with this problem. And hopefully I'll wake up one day and my eyesight will be better. But at this point, I'm wearing an eye patch because my vision in my left eye is completely pitch black. And I do have to go back to work. But I get to work and I'm met by my colleagues who are like, "Oh my God, Yves, what's wrong? You're wearing an eye patch." And I'm like, "Yeah, I'm diagnosed with MS." And they're like, "Oh my God, that's terrible." And of course, I feel their care and I'm so grateful for it. But they're constantly transporting me back to this real-time trauma that I'm really trying to block out to be able to do my work. But anyway, through all of this, I have to take this medication and I have to do this thing called a first dose observation. And that's what it sounds like. Somebody comes to your home and watches you take your first dose. And I call the nurse and she picks up, and I get worked up over the course of this conversation, and she tells me, "Calm down." And y'all know I don't like that. I don't like that. But you know what? I have to give it to her because she's right. I do need to calm down. I've gotten a little bit worked up, and stress is the reason I'm here in the first place. So she comes to my home, and she comes and sits in my windowless apartment, in my windowless living room in my apartment, and she sits on a folding chair in the exact spot where I practice yoga every day and watches me do nothing for hours as she prepares for something terrible to happen that doesn't happen. And so at this point, I start to put the puzzle pieces together. I realized that before I had optic neuritis, but nothing came of that optic neuritis. Nothing came of that MRI, and I was able to move on, But at the same time, the MS was still there. And I started to feel like the MS was this sleeping beast. I kind of thought of it like Smaug in The Hobbit, where he's just like laying on this bed of gold, ready to wreak havoc at any moment. And in my head, I was just like, maybe the MS would have stayed dormant had, I not smoked, or had I not shouted, or had I not eaten processed foods, or all of these and this. But the reality is nobody knows what causes MS. And so I definitely don't know what causes MS, but there is one thing that I know, and that's that what triggered my exacerbation was stress. And so more puzzle pieces start to emerge from beneath the couch. And I start thinking about the idea of self-care and how everybody at the time is like, yeah, self-care is a revolutionary act. And it's not bubble baths. And it sounds kind of gimmicky sometimes, but I realize, yeah, that's actually true. And, the way that stress has materialized in my life is that it is something that's feeling very negative and very potentially dramatically life-changing. And I start to see the cause and effect relationship here. And so I realized that I have to manage my anger and my stress and my frustration in a different way. And that's where yoga comes in. And see, before, yoga had been this vigorous and physical practice for me, but it started to expand. And I started to document my process of yoga as something that could show me what the capability of my body was in every moment as the MS threatened to change me. And so I realized that I had to move on. I had to figure that out. And so I started to let go of the guilt and the shame. And I started to think of the MS as more of a foil in my story than as a villain. But at the same time, my MS remained and my body still remembers. And so I've regained my vision by this point. And I've regained my vision. It's been many years since this has happened. But I still do this thing where I'm startled in the middle of the night because my body involuntarily transports me back to that place where I thought that I might never have my vision again. And I wake up with a start, my heart is beating, and I'm scared. And I'm closing one eye and then the other, trying to search for a sign of light in the darkness. And then in a moment, I'll see some, and I'll see like a sliver of moonlight peeking through the blinds and bouncing off of the wall. And then I'll see the dim orange glow of the numbers on my alarm clock by my bedside. Then I'll look up and I'll see the green indicator on my smoke alarm, and I'll find some relief. The panic will start to dissipate, and I'll fade back into the darkness of sleep. And I have symptoms, but I haven't had any more relapses, and still the MS remains. But now I think of those puzzle pieces and how at first they seem crooked and useless, how they actually fit together to form this bigger, meaningful picture. And I think of the things that do lie dormant and how they have the capacity to ravage us and to make us whole.
Yes, give it up for Eve. That was Eve. To find out more about her, visit our website, storyclatter.org. Being a storyteller on stage is just one way to make story clutter happen, but if standing alone in the spotlight in front of an audience doesn't speak to you, maybe becoming a story clutter donor might be more your speed. Story clutter donors play a vital role in our ability to bring you this podcast. We're in this together. Story clutter is one big experiment that's designed to connect us around our love of discovery, curiosity, and the natural world. If you believe in the power these stories have and this mission, please donate to the Story Clutter at storyclatter.org/donate. Also, today, Friday, November 1st, is the last day all of our donations will be matched up to $10,000, so your contribution can make even more of an impact. The most popular level is $10 a month, and you can make your tax-deductible donation at storyclatter.org/donate. But really, any level makes a difference, and we're so grateful to everyone who supports Story Clutter. Hi, Story Clutter listeners. Menopause doesn't mean you have to suffer. And with Alloy, you don't have to. Alloy offers clinically proven skincare like M4, a moisturizer made for women over 40, which our executive director and sometimes host Erin Barker has been loving. They also offer hair care and sexual wellness solutions, and when you choose Alloy, you get unlimited access to your own menopause-trained doctor. That's right, message them anytime, anywhere with ongoing care. No appointments, no waiting rooms. Take control of your health with Alloy. Go to myalloy.com to start your consult with a menopause-trained expert today. Also, when you visit myalloy.com and use promo code Collider, you get $20 off your first order from now until March 31st, 2025. So what are you waiting for? head to myalloy.com and use promo code Collider today. Our next story is from Jameer Pond. Jameer is a storyteller and video director for Vanity Fair. His story is recorded at our go-to spot in New York, Caveat. And honestly, the only thing you need to know about this story is that it's about a sex sabbatical, and it's hilarious. You're gonna love it. But quick heads up, the story may not be appropriate for listeners under 18. Here's Jameer.
When I was like a teenager, right, like I really wanted to have sex, like bad, despite not knowing my own body. Like I remember when I was like 13 and I saw some pubic hair coming in and I was like, oh no, I'm getting old. So I grabbed my mother's straight Bic razor and trimmed the pubic hair off, raw dog, no cream, nothing. And I was startled a week later when these like pussy, red, itchy bumps came back, and I convinced myself that I had genital herpes despite being a virgin. That's how much I knew about my own body. The only things I really knew about sex came from the LeBron James of black porn, Wesley Pipes. And if you don't know about Wesley Pipes, Google on your own time. But like I would watch this dude on movies like Ghetto Booty 2 and All That Ass 23, and I would be enamored. I mean, he could be anybody he wanted, a doctor, a lawyer, a basketball player, a pizza delivery guy, and it was the same constant. He would be having sex with the most beautiful women. And I knew at 13, that's exactly what I wanted to do with my life. He exemplified everything I thought about manhood. He was a sexual conqueror. And I remember watching him, and by the time I got to college, like that became a part of my personality too, because I figured out that I could have sex pretty fucking well. And that became a part of my personality. I didn't know how to fight. I wasn't good at sports, but I could fuck. And that became my preferred method of communication. I might not be able to tell you how I felt about you, but I could show you. And this worked, it was fun, until it was no longer fun. And it stopped being fun in my 20s when I learned two important words that would change my life. Emotional intimacy. Stupid, right? Like, I started learning about emotional intimacy in a decade on and off long relationship with my ex-partner. And, you know, going into the relationship, it was very much, again, Wesley Pipes-esque, right? The prodigal son of Wesley Pipes. But about like 6 years into the relationship, that started to change. My comfortability with my ex-partner started to grow, and I started to leave my ego at the door and become more present in sex. And I realized how much I liked that I didn't know I liked. For instance, like looking at the person. That's my shit. Y'all like that? Like, that's my shit. Like kissing and cuddling and all the things I couldn't tell my homies I love to do with my shorty. But when we broke up, I took the attentiveness, the comfortability, the safety, all the boyfriend dick things into the streets and started to form, again, those casual sexual relationships. But they were disastrous this time. It was not fun. I couldn't establish my boundaries because every time I would say, hey, no, I don't want to get in a relationship. That's not what I want. My penis would say, marry me. And we were not on the same page. So this came up in therapy, of course. I keep talking to my therapist like, hey, you know, I kind of keep getting in these pseudo relationships where I'm intending not to be in one, but my body is saying something totally different. And my therapist She looked at me and said, well, you know what, Jameer? You should probably take a sex sabbatical. And I'll be honest, around this time, that probably was the cherry on top that made me kind of disgusted with therapy. How dare you try to change me for the better, is what I was thinking in my mind. Sex for me was like Superman with his cape on. What's Superman gonna do without the cape? I did not know who I would be and what I would do without sex in my life at that point in time. And so my therapist was like, well, you can continue to have sex and keep running into the same cycles, or you can give yourself a break, recharge, and think about this. And begrudgingly, I decided to take a sex sabbatical. And I realized I liked it. So then throughout like the pandemic years, I'm taking periodic time where I'm just going on sexual sabbatical residencies. I'm taking myself out the game for load management for all my basketball fans in the building. Because I needed to recharge and reevaluate, and I enjoyed it. I mean, I wasn't worried about getting in relationships. I wasn't worried about like my ego getting in the way of how I felt, about sending mixed messages. I was doing a juice cleanse. Like, I was feeling really good about myself. But then, you know, sometimes you get horny, right? Like, sometimes as humans, we just get horny. I remember this particular time when I got horny. I had been texting another ex-partner of mine. And the thing about her and I is that we have a lot of different chemistry. Like, we got really good sexual chemistry, but we also have really good intellectual chemistry as well. Like, word alliteration when we're talking nasty to each other. And I let her know it was tank time. And she said, it's tank time. I said, it's tank time. So we schedule her coming over. And I'll be honest, like, in the process of her making her way over to my place, I was having second thoughts. I hadn't had sex in a while. Like, I couldn't remember the last time I had sex. I wasn't masturbating or anything like that, and my confidence was fucking with me. I didn't know if I could sexually perform like I used to. Would it be like riding a bike? I don't know. I hadn't been abstinent ever in life like this. But when she comes over, like, that confidence and that comfortability came right back. And we begin to engage in sex. That's right. Now, I'll be honest, I was full, so I arrived at the station a little early. And when I'm about to pull out of the station, follow the pun, there we go, follow the metaphor, we here. When I'm coming out of the station, just like Wesley Pipes, I'm preparing to give this wonderful stream of artistic validation from my body. And this beautiful, powerful pool of dark fuchsia colored liquid shot out of me. Oh, yes. It's a silence. I'm not saying anything. My ex is speechless. The first thing that came to my mind was beats. Right? I had been doing a juice cleanse. And I know this game because the first time I had beats, I had to get a prostate exam because I thought I was bleeding out my ass, and that's another story. But the point is that there was already a hypothesis in process. But as I examined the dark fuchsia-colored fluid, I realized that it was blood. And I went numb, and I went deaf like a little bit. And whatever my ex was saying, I couldn't hear. In my mind, I was going through like my dick highlight reel, like my best performances. Because I for sure thought like this is the last time I'm gonna be able to have sex. And the words from my ex pierced through the deafness, and it was, you gotta go see a doctor. And I was like, fuck, you're right. So I went to Costa Rica. No, I'm playing. I didn't go. I'm playing. I definitely want to throw my Costa Rica hat in there, though. I'm playing, though. So, her and I go to urgent care, and I leave the lobby, and I go into the doctor's office, and I'm trying to keep it cool on the outside, but internally, like, I don't know what's happening. I'm thinking I might die. Is my dick going to die? I don't know what. And so the doctor is like, well, okay, Jameer, like, what's going on? I said, I'm gonna be honest with you. I just blood, doc, and I don't know what that means, and I'm scared, but this never happened to me before. And he sat back and he was like, are you in pain right now? And I was like, no. He said, did it hurt or was anything sore when you were ejaculating? I was like, no, like it felt normal. And so he sat back and he had this smirk on his face and he said, well, you know, Mr. Pond, this is actually more common than you think. He said, Doc, I'm menstruating out of my dick right now. There's nothing common about this for me, at least for me. And he said, well, if this is the first time it's happening, there's no pain, you might have suffered what is called hematospermia, which is a pop blood vessel in the urethra of your penis. I was like, a pop blood vessel? He said, a pop blood vessel. And so he started to go over the symptoms, like, you know, it's built through sometimes some rough sex, you know, painful sex, or large buildups of abstinence. And I was like, the fucking abstinence. Goddamn abstinence got me. And so, like we said, but he was like, you know, we're gonna test you and make sure that you're good and you're clear, and you know, that you'll be all right. And I started to get frustrated because, like, as a man, I'm 35 years old. This is the first time I've ever heard of hematospermia. And I asked, I said, how come I've never heard about this? How come I've never heard about this discussed in medical circles or anything like that? No, I haven't seen any studies. They ain't talk about this on Bill Nye the Science Guy. Like, I've heard nothing about this. And he said, well, Mr. Pond, frankly, a lot of men are embarrassed. Like 1 in 5,000 men are diagnosed with like hematospermia. But I suspect that it's small, it's a larger number of people, but nobody comes to get checked. So you're one of the rare ones that does. And I said, bloodshot out of my dick. I don't think you understand. But they test me, I'm clear, and he says, in 3 days max, you should be good as new. And I thought about that. I was really proud of myself. Like, my idea of like manhood kind of changed. It wasn't like I was looking at Wesley and I'm like, yes, that's a man. I'm just glad I spoke up when I saw an alarming sign. You know, my first method of communication is sex, but I'm glad I used my second, which is speaking the fuck up about my body. Thank you.
That was Jameer. If you'd like to learn more about him, visit our website, storycollider.org. Our website is just one way to connect with Story Collider, but there are so many other ways, and we hope you'll use them all. You can always follow us on social media. We're on X, Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok. Head to storycollider.org to become a financial supporter, or if you want to come to one of our shows, start your own Story Collider show in your community, or even learn how to tell your own science story, you can learn all about that on our website too. This podcast is produced by me, Misha Gajewski, along with Jen Chen, Nikisha Roberts-Washington, and Aaron Barker, Executive Director and co-founder of The Story Collider. The stories featured in today's episode were produced by Emma Yarbrough, Kelly Vinyl, Paula Croxon, and Christine Gentry. Special thanks goes out to Story Collider's board and team. Our theme music is by Ghost, and next week I'll be back with stories about the flaws in our healthcare system. They're deeply fascinating and impactful, and you won't want to miss them. Until next time, thanks so much for listening.